Our next guest for the traditional Unchained Fireside Chat is the well-known Mr. Brock Pierce. Hey, very good. Welcome. Great to hear. So, super. Okay. Very nice. Great that you could make it.
Glad to be here.
Yeah.
I've been away from Berlin too long.
Okay.
I think there's just certain cities where there's so much wonderful, activity occurring. Berlin is one of the most important cities for our sector. A lot of important things being built here. And, I don't like to be away too long.
That's why we're here. Okay. So all those Berliners, welcome you here. Brock, you've been in digital money even earlier than Satoshi. Even before Bitcoin, you already had something to do with digital money in the game space, right? Please tell me about about that previous life of yours.
Yeah, I grew up playing games. And when I was young, I started selling, software when I was like 10. And I was very into collecting baseball cards and call it Magic the Gathering cards. And started figuring out algorithms of where the high-value cards were in the boxes or how you could feel the pack to identify the high-value cards. And I would develop relationships with the people that ran the stores so that I would get to access the boxes first. And I was just a funky kid while acting at the same time. And a game came out from a company called Digital Addiction called Sanctum. And it was basically Magic the Gathering meets chess online. So this is like 1999, 1998. And I ended up amassing the biggest card collection in the game. And people then would want to buy like the Sword of Zarathustra from me or whatever it might be. And so I became essentially the single store for this entire game economy. And so I contacted the game company and said, I'd like to buy your digital packs of cards in bulk. And I'd like to do the same thing that baseball card shops and comic book stores do today. I want to basically take that analog model and do it digitally. And you need a robust secondary market to drive the primary, and you shouldn't be doing both. And they're like, that makes sense. And so set up this little business. The game never got to more than like 5,000 players. So it stayed a little business. But what it did is it made it very clear to me that just because something was intangible, it didn't make it any less valuable. Then along came massively multiplayer games. Ultima Online, EverQuest, eventually things like World of Warcraft and Second Life. But when I started to see that market taking off, that's when the business became very interesting. And so I ended up building the main secondary market, the main market-making business for game currencies. And it became a fairly big business. We did tens of billions of dollars of sales. We built a supply chain in China of 400,000 people that would play video games professionally to mine digital currencies. We were PayPal's largest merchant for years. We launched Alipay. We were Google's largest advertiser for a little while back in the beginning. Wild stuff.
You call that mining? When Chinese play video games, you called it mining back in the days?
Yeah, it went by, eventually the name that stuck, because the media liked to sensationalize it, they eventually called it Chinese gold farming. And it was generally perceived negatively. So the incumbent game industries at the time didn't like what I was doing. It was in violation of their end user license agreements in terms of service. And, I went to war with Blizzard and, it was all sorts of fun stuff. But at the same time, I had taken over the media for the gaming industry. So I had to figure out how to reach more gamers. And so I rolled up all of the fan sites, which was a top 100 web property in the world. I sold it to Tencent in January of 2012. It's Zam.com. But if you've ever played games like World of Warcraft, we owned brands like Wowhead, ThoughtBot, Alakazam. If you ever played World of Warcraft, you used our tools or likely bought gold from us too.
And how was the transition from that early digital money to the real decentralized digital cash? How did you discover Bitcoin?
Well, everybody that wanted to build a digital currency, a community currency, many of these groups from around the world would all come to me because I was kind of referred to as the godfather of digital currency before Bitcoin. And, Wired called me that. And so people would seek me out to ask me my opinions about, projects. And so that's how Bitcoin was on my radar.
When was that?
Early on. Early on. It wasn't until, so we did some early mining, I did, a couple friends that I used to work with. It wasn't until 2012 where this became a major focus. It was just something to kind of keep tabs on, across 2010, 2011. I wasn't sure, when this was going to take off and in what form. I learned a lot about market timing over the course of my career, and my opinion of Bitcoin was always this or something like it is the future. I just don't know if the future is now or 25 years from now. And it wasn't until 2012 where this started to become a major focus. We became major miners. That was kind of the first thing that most people do when you got into this business back then. These days I wouldn't recommend it, but no one knew any better. And it was actually profitable there for a moment. We ended up with 10% of the batch 1 Avalon, so we had 10% of all the world's first ASICs, which I think probably made us the largest miner in the world for that moment. I became the exclusive distributor for KNC Miner China. The first Bitcoin ATM came out, RoboCoin. We became the exclusive distributor for all of Asia because I had a lot of experience in Asia. I gave CZ his first job. He was the CEO of RoboCoin Asia before going to OKCoin. Steve Beauregard, who's here in the office, we started, here in the, at the event. Steve and I started a company called GoCoin, which was one of the early payment processors. Well, I got to a point where I think I was starting a new company every 2 months, every 2 or 3 months. Well, so I built a lot of businesses, and so I was running like an incubator and just cranking out business after business until I got to the point that I was trying to run 16 companies, and it just, you can only scale and spread yourself so thin and be effective, and so that's where I migrated into the venture capital side in, call it summer, fall of 2013, and started Blockchain Capital. So my partners, Bart and Brad Stevens, were major investors in my game company. They ran the biggest hedge fund in the world investing in game companies. And so they realized one day that they're paying Blizzard $15 a month for World of Warcraft, but they're paying $100 or $200 a month for gold. They're like, this is actually potentially a very big business. We need to learn more about this. And so they went and found the top 10 companies that you could buy gold from, and then they started doing a research project to figure out who owns them, and they found out they were all me. And so they're like, who is this kid that's rolled up this whole industry before anyone even realized it existed? And so they cold called me, and that's how we ended up in business. But Brad was on the board, and it was in 2012. So my main investor was Goldman Sachs. Principal Strategies, GSPS, was the black box of Goldman that was responsible for 40% of their income. This was and I was their first private investment they ever made. And the reason why is they're like, you're managing 3,500 different currencies across servers and mining and supply chains and fulfillment and hundreds of thousands of people in China. They're like, we don't know what this all is, but the numbers are real, and we just need to be tracking whatever. There's going to be something important that happens with digital currency one day. And so I went to them in 2012 because the business was doing $1 billion a year. We had 95% market share in South Korea. The team from that group is the same team that started BitThumb, and we turned on a lot of the Korean market. We did some of the same work in China early on. But I was chairman of the board, and Steve Bannon was my CEO at that time.
Steve Bannon, wow, okay.
Yes, well, Steve Bannon was my right hand for 7 years.
As an investor, we just had investors panel before. What were the criteria? In which companies would you invest? How did you decide what to invest? And what were your major investments that you're still happy with that you did them?
Well, very happy with the Blockchain Capital portfolio. We're investors in Coinbase and Kraken and BTC China. All the early exchanges, investors in BitGo and Zappo and Circle, and we're invested in, I think, every major early company. It's nice when you're early. So in the beginning, it started more as just a Keiretsu club. I just went to 10 or 15 of the CEOs in the space and said, hey, let's all pool some resources and throw money around, and that way we're all vested in each other's future success. And then it became formalized. Well, it came from this call with my old game company board. I said, hey guys, we have 95% market share. We can't grow anymore. The value of the business is declining even though we're growing because the growth rates are not, we're moving at the rate of the game industry. We need to expand into another market. I'd like to buy Mt. Gox. I want us to move into the Bitcoin space. And, Goldman and everyone's like, are you nuts? They're like, isn't that just for drugs? And I'm like, no, I actually think that, it's an interesting business. I said, it's really poorly run. Infrastructure's horrible, management's horrible, but they have the market. We have the management team. We have the technology. We can fix this thing. And this is before there was any problems. But it was, if you had ever spent any time with the company, you'd know in an instant that something bad was like, well, no, I tried to buy it. And the board was like, no way. And so then I said, well, I really think this is what we need to do. And so I'm going to send you a bunch of research. And so I started sending the board, all the reasons I thought that Bitcoin was potentially going to be a thing. So 3 months later, we're back on the next board call, and I said, I want to buy Mt. Gox. And they kind of laughed again. I'm like, did anyone read the materials I sent you? And basically no one bothered to. It was just dismissed. Then I called up my partners, Bart and Brad. I said, hey guys, you're my friends. You actually play games. You understand all of this stuff. Of all the people, I'm really disappointed that you didn't, take the time to be informed. It's okay for you to disagree with me, but at least have an informed opinion. Don't just dismiss it and disregard it and not read any of the materials I sent you. And so they took that to heart, and that's eventually how Blockchain Capital got started.
Okay. And now a little bit fast forward, because one of your latest projects is kind of saving Mt. Gox, yeah, right? The Gox Rising thing. Can you say anything about that? Yeah, so then I went back to, well, what happened is eventually the board said, no, we don't want to buy Mt. Gox. Goldman Sachs at the time couldn't get comfortable with it owning the large, indirectly, but being the largest investor in the main Bitcoin exchange. So I said, well, if you guys aren't going to approve me doing this, I'd like to be able to go do it personally. And so then I went back down that rabbit hole, set up a deal to buy Mt. Gox, and originally it was going to look a little bit like the CoinLab deal. So I bought mtgox.cn, and I was going to run the Chinese version and bring Mt. Gox into China. Lined up the management team, lined up the money, lined up everything, and like the night before we're going to have a closing, I couldn't sleep. I'm like, I'm going to be relying upon their back end. If anything happens in Japan, I'm screwed. And I pulled the plug on the deal. Just my intuition said, there's going to be issues. And I was fortunately right. I didn't know enough to be able to protect anyone else because it was just intuition. I didn't have any evidence of money having been missing. What's the purpose of Gox Rising? What do you want to do with this? Well, what happened is the day Mt. Gox failed, I called up Mark Karpeles within minutes. And I said, Mark, I want to buy Mt. Gox. And he goes, are you not watching the news? I said, that's why I'm calling. And he goes, and you're still interested? I go, well, the terms have changed. $1. But yeah, I said, you're going to sell it to me for $1 because you're going to let the big boys come in and clean up your mess and hopefully keep your ass out of jail, which we did agree to. And but I changed in the contract. I changed it to 1 Bitcoin. I thought it was more fitting. And at the time, that would make me very generous. It was like a 460x increase in the purchase price from what was originally agreed upon. I signed that deal with Jed McCaleb. I signed that deal with Mark. And about 2-3 weeks in,
Mark's lawyers were freaking out, and Mark attempted to rescind the deal. Bankruptcy goes into liquidation. I kind of just throw up my hands and waste another couple months on it, and then realize that this is going to take 5 to 10 years to play it out. Fast forward to today, there's a very, very large amount of Bitcoin and money still held within the Mt. Gox estate. It's currently in bankruptcy proceedings. They're trying to take it out of liquidation and into rehabilitation. That may or may not happen. And if it doesn't go into rehabilitation, the liquidation price was set at Bitcoin at the time, meaning the shareholder is going to make hundreds of millions of dollars, if not $1 billion or more. And so who owns Mt. Gox is kind of important. I don't want to see CoinLab or Peter Vicenis, take all the money from the victims or the creditors that had their money at Mt. Gox, and I don't want to see Mark Karpelès make a dime. And so this is getting involved, because if someone doesn't, something like that could happen. And so the idea is to make sure that the creditors get 100% of all of the cash and coin that is there, to relaunch a new Mt. Gox and give equity to all of the victims or creditors. In this case, in the same way that, like, when Bitfinex failed, there's ways that you can give ownership and further economic interest to the market participants. We've learned that lesson. I mean, if we had done this with Mt. Gox originally, which was the idea way back when, everyone might have been made whole by now.
So how does it work practically? If I had money, lost money on my Gox, fortunately I didn't, how would I do it? Would I apply for that or file something? Or how was it,
well, yeah, the main thing is in the bankruptcy proceeding, you have to be, you had to file your claim. And if you haven't done that and you're a Mt. Gox creditor, like, do that before you go to bed tonight, because you're past due. Not necessarily, that doesn't mean that you won't get your money, but you need to go do that. So that's the most important thing. You can come to Gox Rising and sign up with us to keep track of things. We have a team of lawyers and a team of people, and we're tracking what's going on in Japan and distilling that information and publishing that for everyone, as an information sort of resource. But the big idea is that Mt. Gox is our Lehman Brothers. It's our Bear Stearns. And the story's not over yet. We have the ability to write the ending of this story. I'd rather see it be a good one than a bad one. There's at least 3 movie deals in Hollywood that have been done. There's a whole bunch of, the Mt. Gox story is going to be a story that is not going away. It's going to be told. And the question is, what is the ending? Okay. Because everyone's waiting for the end of the story. Let's try to make it a good one, where...
So what's your motivation in it? It doesn't sound like a business idea. It's more like a, let's make it better, yeah? Something like...
Well, I think of myself as a janitor or a plumber. I usually do the things in this business that no one else wants to do or no one else can do. I don't do things, I'm not motivated by money. I find that I make enough as it is. I'll be okay. I try to go do the most interesting things. And going in and trying to resurrect Gox and deliver a happier ending, is... It's kind of on the crazy end. Everyone that I work with said, Brock, please don't do this. Okay. Please don't do another one of these crazy things. I couldn't help myself.
Okay, very nice. Yeah. You were also involved with one of the very early, I think they weren't even called ICOs back then, right? Mastercoin and your own blockchain token, right?
Yeah, so I was one of the founding board members, largest investors at Mastercoin, where we did the first ever ICO. And yeah, we didn't call it an ICO at the time. Started Tether, which is crazy numbers. It has bigger trading volume than Bitcoin. Does like $20 trillion a year run rate right now. Kind of amazing what's happened there. We did the first ever security token at BCAP. I'm always trying to go do pioneering things. I'm in the business of, like, I go figure it out, open source the idea, and then I move on. I don't wait for the payday.
How do you see the development of ICOs? I mean, there was this big hype in 2017. Now everybody's a bit frustrated, probably. How do you see the perspective of ICOs, STOs, you name it?
Well, I like what I see right now with the IEO. The IEO, is just the utility token ICO all over again, but with better checks and balances. The exchanges are essentially acting as underwriters. And so they're a filtering process. This looks a little bit more like how Wall Street functions. The idea of projects going directly to consumers that were not very sophisticated when everyone's got FOMO and get rich quick kind of schemes. The ICO market was a mess. And it wasn't rational. As a VC and someone that funds entrepreneurs, you don't give entrepreneurs 50 years of cash. The odds of success actually goes into decline because you've given people too much money. VCs figured this out a long time ago. It's meant to be milestone-based financing. That is what venture capital is. And so I like the current format of the IEO. It's underwritten. The exchanges are vetting projects, picking the best projects, which is, preventing, call it garbage from, taking advantage of people. And there's smaller sums of money. Most of the IEOs now are bringing in $5 or $10 million, which is all you really need to get started. But they're also not giving up 90% of their tokens. I like the way the market's looking right now. And obviously the STO, or the security token market, is now finally developing. It's taken a year longer than I thought it would. But when we did the BCAP offering, I knew that I was putting the cart before the horse. I just figured security token exchanges would come online faster than they have. But, we have that now with Open Finance and Security, Securitize, T0, Templum. Security token exchanges are coming online.
Yeah. You're also responsible for one of the, maybe even the biggest ICO ever, EOS with $4 billion or 5. How many is it now?
I don't think that we ever officially stated, but I think the press number is 4.2.
Okay.
4.2 billion, I think, is what it was.
And what do you think about that? Isn't it also too much money, and the founders get fat and lazy and don't really do anything? Shouldn't it be also milestone, that capital?
Well, it depends on. The answer is probably so. But when you're building an underlying protocol, when you're building a blockchain, the amount of capital you have, you can't have enough capital. The question is just, does it get deployed correctly? If you're trying to push a new protocol, the more capital you have, the greater the likelihood that you'll be successful.
And what do they do with all this money? I'm asking myself.
Well, obviously you don't spend it all at once.
Lambos.
And so, no, Dan Larimer still lives in the same house that he's lived in for 10 years. I mean, none of us, our lifestyles haven't changed one iota. The first thing that we did is we took $1 billion and created EOS VC. And the idea was to give capital to venture capitalists that they would be in control of and that they would go deploy. Okay. So seed the ecosystem. If you want to have lots of development and you want to have great entrepreneurs, building things, providing them with capital is, a very compelling way to incent more activity. And so $1 billion of that went to EOS VC. And they still have...
Follows a classical VC pattern with small tranches and milestones and all that.
And I don't know what the official data point here is, but they probably still have $4 or $5 or $6 billion, which over the long haul is going to be important. There's a number of great blockchains out there, that have wonderful potential, but they're not well capitalized. I don't know how you're going to succeed long term and call it the war of the chains without being well capitalized. There's only 5 or so blockchains that have the money to play this game. It's a high stakes game where you have to be able to incent developers. And if you can't finance that and figure out how to create an economic incentive for development, I mean, it's the most important thing when developing or pushing a blockchain today is developer adoption, right? You need developer adoption. And that developer adoption has to lead ultimately to dApps, successful dApps. And more developers generally means greater likelihood of successful dApps, but not directly. And then you ultimately need lots of end users and account holders. And the more capital you have, I think the greater the likelihood that you'll get adoption, but it depends on how well deployed it is. Microsoft clearly is an example of, until recently, everything they did kind of didn't work out. Well, you have to have all of those things, but capital certainly helps.
Let's have questions with the audience, but with the mic. But I have one more question because I'm very interested in what you're doing in Puerto Rico. I think you just moved there. You have a project to help develop the island, the people, but it's also some kind of crypto havens. What's happening exactly in Puerto Rico?
Well, what I realized is, well, I first went down to Puerto Rico. So in 2013, one of the problems that I identified is that if you were a crypto startup in the United States and you wanted to open a bank account, the banks basically wouldn't bank anyone. Coinbase, Circle, and Zappo were banked at Silicon Valley Bank, but other than that, no one else could really get banking. But they did get banking. But they didn't disclose the nature of their business, which in the US is a felony. But most people just didn't realize the risks they were taking. And so I viewed banking as a systemic risk to our industry. If government wanted to crack down, you could systematically wipe out most of the startups by rounding us all up and arresting us, because of how we opened our bank accounts. And so I said, there's got to be a way to solve that. I go, well, I don't know that much about banking, but I can figure out how to start a bank. I can figure out how to buy a bank. And so I went to work on that in late 2013. He started looking at all the state chartered banks that were for sale, federally chartered banks that were for sale, learned how credit unions and co-ops work, and everything was going to cost too much money. It was going to cost $25 million basically to do it in a way that I thought would work, and it would take at least 2 years. And at the time, there was only one financing in the industry that had ever been $25 million, and that was Coinbase's Series B. And so, in knowing that, it's like, all right, this is going to be kind of hard to do, buying a distressed bank, multiple years to see if it works. I go, there's got to be another way to do this. I'm like, well, I'm a hacker. There's got to be a back door. What's the back door into the US financial system? I go, oh wait, the US Virgin Islands, Guam, Samoa, Puerto Rico. And so then I got a hold of the main person down in Puerto Rico that was promoting all the tax benefits. And he's explaining to me how Act 20 and Act 22 works, and how I wouldn't pay any taxes. I said, well, thank you for those explanations, but I'm not motivated by money. And so the opportunity cost is too great for me. I can't live in paradise. But it's really cool. But I really wanted to have this conversation with you because I wanted to ask you about banking in Puerto Rico. Is there a way to set up a bank in Puerto Rico, or is there a way to buy a bank in Puerto Rico that can bank Bitcoin companies? And he's like, oh yeah, as a matter of fact, there is. As part of that same legislation in 2012, there's this other thing called Act 273 that allows you to create an international financial entity, which is an offshore bank to anyone internationally, but an onshore bank, like a federally chartered bank, to everyone in the United States. The only thing is you can't bank Puerto Rican companies or people. I said, oh, that's interesting. I go, how many people have done this? He goes, no one. So I jumped on a plane and we started the first crypto bank in the world. It was called Noble Bank. And figured that one out through Puerto Rico. And so this is where Puerto Rico first kind of got its, call it hook into me. And I became very familiar with all of its interesting nuances. But, you could spend a lifetime down there just studying law, and it's amazing. Because it's a U.S. territory, but it's got its own constitution in English and Spanish, and both apply, and they're not perfect. There's just all sorts of it's super interesting. But what happened later is I started telling people at some point, because I'm like, oh, I could live in Puerto Rico if there was a critical mass of it. The problem is I can't retire. I get bored quickly. And so I would need hundreds of us there working on things so as not to get bored. And so I started telling lots of friends. And Michael Turpin was patient zero that moved down there to.
And you convinced Michael. I thought it was the other way around. You were first.
I was doing Noble and sharing knowledge. I was telling people about this tax stuff that I don't know if he heard about it from the first time from me or not. I probably though. Michael and I have known each other for 15 years. I brought him into the crypto space. And because he did PR for some of my other companies at the time. And I told him to come to the San Jose conference because I was gonna do my first kind of public. I'm working on stuff in the space, and then the day before the San Jose conference, I chickened out. I'm like, okay, I can't be visible yet. I don't want to go to jail. I don't want to die. And that's for a while. I was concerned, you know, again, if you weren't in crypto in 2012 or 13, I mean, reputationally, this was considered to be only criminal activity. I mean, that was all the press wrote about. There was not
like the internet in the early 90s.
Yeah, but you know, I was a little nervous, you know, about, you know,
ending up like Charlie Schwab, yeah?
Becoming that, exactly.
So you now live in Puerto Rico most of the time?
Yeah, so what happened is, I realized wherever I went in the world, interesting people would show up and follow. And so once you start to realize that you become a nexus of sorts, it becomes a responsibility. You know, I could live in New York and London and San Francisco, and you know, that's great. I love those cities. But my being there isn't going to make those places any better off. They already are the main beneficiaries of all the intellectual brain drain from all over the world. And so I felt the need to run a social experiment, which is, let's see if I can go move to a place that could benefit greatly, and let's see if people follow. And
how many have followed?
I think there's about 1,500 of us that have moved to Puerto Rico in the last year and a half.
1,500?
Yeah.
Wow. All crypto people, yeah?
No, it's not all crypto. It's
okay.
Lots of interesting people, but there's a lot of crypto people now, and a lot more, you know, on the way. I think another 50 people in the last week or two have said they're on their way.
But mostly US Americans, because the only place, the only loophole, yeah?
Yes.
As a German, I can move anywhere and not pay tax in Germany, but as a US citizen, you are like bound to your...
Yeah, as Americans, we pay, we get taxed on our worldwide income, meaning if we live in Germany and don't return to the US for 10 years, we still have to pay full taxes in the US, wherever we live in the world. Yeah, but in Puerto Rico, we don't pay any federal taxes, no capital gain taxes in Puerto Rico. We pay 4% tax on ordinary income. So we pay no taxes, and so that's the incentive that, you know, I tell people, oh, you need to come to Puerto Rico. They're like, really? What's it like? I go, you know, paradise, and they're like, oh, that sounds good, cool. And I go, and think of the social impact, Hurricane Maria, like make the world a better place. We can all go live in a nice place with a lower cost of income. I'm like, oh, you know, after I give you 30 minutes of telling you really compelling like information, people are like, oh, yeah, I need to come check it out. And then as I'm about to leave, I'm like, but did I tell you about the taxes? And they're like, no, what about those? I go, and there's 0 taxes. They're like, I'm packing my bags.
But how's the reaction of the locals? I heard there was this meeting and said, oh, we don't need a white savior with blue eyes. And there was this kind of racist commentary. Yeah? Is it still like that, or have they got used to you guys?
Yeah, we've never had any issue. There's only 2 times ever that we had any confrontation, and it was when a camera was rolling. Okay. So let's just say that it's fake news. I mean, naturally, Puerto Rican people are skeptical, and as they should be. They've been mistreated for 500 years. Most people don't understand how historically significant it is either. When Christopher Columbus sailed across the Atlantic in 1492, Puerto Rico wasn't his first stop, but it's where he set up shop. The first outpost. You know, all of Europe's influence on the Americas and the indigenous people, everything, it all began in Old San Juan. That was the first city, the first road built by the conquistadors. I live on the first road. And I mean, every building is historically, you know, so significant. And I believe if you think historically about timelines, you know, if you want to fix something, going back to the beginning, you know, kind of going full circle, is not a bad strategy.
Like you go back to Magic the Gathering, yeah, which is empty box actually. The first cards that you. It's kind of another closing circle, right?
I like to close loops. Actually, since you do movie stuff, this is, you know, kind of one of the things I'm working on these days. You know, security tokens, I think, are going to be a big deal. And there's a couple of like loops in life that you can close out. I started out in the entertainment business. I started out as an actor, and then I was producing stuff and messing around with media in my teenage years, and during the Internet 1.0.
We run out of time, but we always have time for questions. Please. You're not questioning, you're not asking, but you're asking. Take the mic, please.
Hi.
Leave the room. Yeah. Okay.
Hi. So I have 2 questions. First,
Close to the mic.
First question is regarding because you mentioned IEOs. So, what is your opinion for STOs and security tokens? You mentioned that you think that it's going to be a big deal. but are you promoting projects to launch on the EOS platform? Because I'm asking, for example, because I have a STO.
Keep the question short, please.
Yeah, are you motivating projects to build STOs on the platform of EOS instead of Ethereum and make ERC20 tokens? And the second question is, how much are you relying on dApps for the future of EOS? Is it because now it's obviously the biggest, dApps are the biggest thing for EOS. So
yeah, so I first of all, I don't promote any chain. I'm chain agnostic. I believe that if anyone succeeds in making the world a better place, we all win. And I think, you know, coin or chain maximalism, my chain is better than your chain, my coin is better than your coin, reminds me a lot of religious fundamentalism. I support innovation in all of its forms. And so I try not to promote anything. I encourage everyone to do their own research and figure out what is best for them. And depending upon the project, depending on what you're wanting to, you know, what you want to build, Ethereum is certainly the standard right now for STOs. All of the early STO exchanges and infrastructure has principally been built on Ethereum, and so that's probably where you need to go. Depending upon the nature of the dApp that you're building, and depending upon what feature sets you need, EOS may make sense. Ethereum might make more sense for you. I don't know without knowing more about, you know, what you're trying to do. There's trade-offs and benefits, you know, to do this versus that. But you know, in terms of IEOs and STOs, or and what you should be considering, you know, how do you choose? I would always do what is best for your end user. Whatever is best for your user. You know, people too often try to do what's best for themselves as the founders and the creators. Think of yourself as a steward. Think of yourself, you know, how do you best serve your customer? And when you structure your product to do what is in the best interest of your community, you know, serve them first, yourself second. Whenever you structure things that way, you're probably doing it the right way. And so whatever is best for your end user is what you should do.
That's great. Question.
Another question I have is, what happened to your Puerto Rican bank? Were you able to service U.S. clients with that bank, or you were not? Thank you.
Yeah, so I move on from projects, and so I stepped out of Tether in late 2015. I stepped out of Noble Bank in early 2016. I think I don't need to walk everyone through the Tether Bitfinex stuff. Noble Bank is in the process of shutting down as part of all of that. But there's a new bank you can go check out. It's a good friend of mine is Prince Lorenzo de Medici, and one of my old partners, Ed Boyle, back in the Ed Boyle was the founder of the prepaid division of American Express that he ran for 7 years. And so we started a company called Blade Payments in late 2013, early 2014, so that you could use a Visa, MasterCard, Amex rails. It turned out that people don't want to spend their crypto, and so it was more of a feature than a business. Then he went on to become president of Fedor Bank for North America. And so Prince Lorenzo de Medici and Ed just founded a new Puerto Rican bank.
Medici
It's
name,
called
right?
Medici Bank. I figured the Medici started the first bank. The family might as well come out of retirement to start the last bank. And kick off, you know, this, call it digital renaissance. At least it's a good story.
More questions? You see opportunity. Yes, Anna.
Hi. Compared to the crypto winter, to NASDAQ crash, what do you think, where are we, at what stage are we in the crypto winter at the moment?
Well, I think crypto winter is over. I think
Crypto summer, obviously. Yeah.
we're in crypto spring. You know, I think summer still, and there still may be a cold front, you know, before summer. You know, there's definitely this month, FATFA, there's some, you know, there's some stuff that could happen in June that will be problematic for the industry. If we get through June and we're in July, I think we're going to see pretty smooth sailing. But we could see banking disruption before the end of the month. And if we see serious banking disruption, that will definitely set us back a bit.
I have a question. What do you think of the Mark Zuckerberg coin? Will that totally change the crypto space? The Facebook coin?
I think that, I'm a fan of the JP Morgan coin. I think it's all good. JP Morgan creating a coin gives us a lot of air cover. It basically says that, well, it validates the work that we're doing here. Do I think it'll be successful? Probably not. Will the Facebook coin? Probably so. But these things, I think, are all good. And if Facebook ends up building something that's sufficiently decentralized and sufficiently, gives power back to the people, gives us ownership of our digital DNA, if Facebook does that the right way, hallelujah, awesome. Do I think they're going to get there? Probably not, but we'll see. I'm in that Burning Man wedding photo, the yellow unicorn is the head of all of Facebook's payments and gaming and things, who is responsible for all blockchain. I'm close with the Facebook guys.
Well, unless Oscar throws us out of stage, I think we have another question. Yeah, sure.
Thanks for that story. It's extremely fascinating. Thank you.
Close to the mic.
I was just wondering, do you think then that regulated banking institutions that enable adoption and functioning of big proper crypto companies is something that's good and necessary for the industry, or?
Yeah, banking is absolutely critical because we do not yet live in a world where we don't need access to traditional rails. If you've ever had your bank account shut off and your credit card shut off, and you have to live entirely on crypto, it's better today than it was last year, and the year before that, and the year before that, but we still need rails, and if we want to onboard new customers, we need traditional rails. Those are the on-ramps and the off-ramps, and so we desperately need continued access for many years to come. If we were to lose access to the banking rails, it would put a massive dent into the speed of adoption. It will slow down everything. Well, and it will encourage that the JP Morgan coins of the world and the Facebook coins of the world are more likely to have success. I mean, we need to make sure that we can continue to be banked. The good news is the world's a big place, and this is beneficial to enough people that I don't think that they'll ever be able to shut us off completely. If the worst is to happen, and if the worst is to happen, it's happening this month. This is that month.
And what's the banking disruption? What's the banking disruption that you mentioned? Is there a secret?
Yeah, FATF is the international organization that basically decides, is our industry North Korea, Iran? Is there like global sanctions put on anyone that banks, companies like ours? And that decision, you can read some of what's out there. This is pretty esoteric stuff. But if that decision will likely be made by the G20, I think it gets made before the end of the month. And what they do, we'll see how deep it cuts. But this is the worst thing we've dealt with so far.
Oscar, do we have time for one more question?
Yeah.
Yeah? Great, okay. Veronica.
So hi, my question is, now in Asia is an emerging market where in every country now are trying to put up their own coin or they do their own regulations to set up regulations in different exchanges, tokens and this. Is it really advisable for a country, let's say, to have their own stable asset that will be backed by their reserves? Is it really advisable for a country to do that?
I mean, clearly we've seen that there's demand for digital dollars with Tether. Which I think validates the fact that central banks should clearly be thinking about tokenizing or digitizing their currency. I think that's every country should be looking at doing that. As a central bank, that's what I'd be thinking about. There's clearly demand for it. The question is, do you want more of your dollars circulating? And it depends on the state of what your country's objectives are.
Okay, because in Philippines right now they're planning to put up to do a stable asset for, like with RCBC, they wanted to do their own stable coin.
For the Philippines in particular, you have 100 million people,
yes,
about 80% of whom are on or underbanked, which means if you created a Filipino peso token where you just need a phone, because there's more cell phones than people, you could create ubiquitous financial inclusion in that country. That would be a hugely beneficial thing. It doesn't, solve our government's mismanaging their currency and too much quantitative easing. But if we can give 80% of the population
financial tools and financial services, that would be a wonderful thing. That will greatly improve the quality of life of 80% of the Filipinos. So yes, that would be a great thing. The world benefits.
Okay, thank you so much for that.